Now welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that basically asked, from your point of view, are the Jedi good or evil, or maybe kind of somewhere in between? I'll then of course be reading and responding to some of the comments left on the poll, and so let's get right to it, where we'll see that the majority of people, 59%, thought the Jedi were well-intended, but with a few or some problems. There were then 21% who said they were very much good and just, but not quite perfect. 15% then went with wrong and or misguided, but not truly evil, which left 3% to say they were indeed evil, plain and simple, and only 2% who voted true paragons of virtue. And what I think might just be the most surprising part of these results is that essentially here more people thought they were pure evil than thought they were true good. That's almost kind of sad, I think, because though sure, an argument can be made that the Jedi aren't exactly perfect, I don't really know how you make one that they're actually truly evil. I don't know how you watch the films and take that away from them, that there is absolutely nothing good and or redeeming about the Jedi whatsoever. And though, yeah, some people might just be trolling here with that response, that's inevitably going to happen with pretty much anything you try and do online, but I'm sure there are truly a small percentage of people out there that believe the Jedi, the idea of it, and everything that goes with it, to be evil. And I do kind of think that comes mainly from the prequels. I think for some, or again from their point of view, those films cast quite the negative light on the Jedi, to the point where they really think part of the prophecy of the Chosen One involved Anakin needing to destroy them as well. And I can't help but wonder what the results of a poll like this would have looked like before those films ever came out. If I could poll tens of thousands of fans about the Jedi before those films ever came out, because something tells me the results would be kind of radically different here. Which is interesting because I think those films, the OT, they show how the Jedi should be, and the prequels how they had fallen a bit, quite a bit actually. I think some people forget that the prequels do not show the Jedi as they should be, but what they have become and how they were on the cusp of destruction. But before I get too deep into that, let's get to some comments, because there were some really good ones on this poll. There were a ton of great responses, and I certainly enjoyed just reading what people thought about the Jedi and why they thought that. It was very enlightening, let's say. But before we do get to them, let me just quickly once again say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these or any of my videos across the two channels. And a big thank you to those who support this channel on Patreon and are always talking some Star Wars on my Discord server. And now let's get to the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Caleb Darsky, who said, "What's interesting about the Jedi of the prequel era is that they slowly became more aware that they were playing directly into the plans of the Dark Lord, but still believed they were powerful enough to stop it whenever it revealed itself. They never stopped to question why they hadn't seen this coming, because they were so far removed from the original light side tenets of morality, knowledge, and justness that bound them before. This is willing ignorance, but that doesn't mean they were driven by selfish, evil ideals compared to most Darksiders." And personally, I don't think they were that far removed from their core tenets, because I think they were still good and doing what was right, by and large. I just don't think they were going about it the right way. I've talked a lot before about how the biggest flaw of the Jedi at this point in time, as demonstrated by, say, a Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace, is that they were more so following the will of the Republic and not the will of the Force. Going along with this, they had become very dogmatic. They were following the rules of the code to the letter, even when a sign from the Force itself, the possible or likely coming of the Chosen One, for example, even when that is right in front of them, they're still like, nope, can't train him because our rules say he's too old. Even though it's pretty clear the Force led Qui-Gon to him for a reason, and if we don't train him, we're ignoring the will of the Force in favor of what our rule book says. And that part does go along with what you said, that they thought they knew better, that they thought they were kind of infallible, that sure, the Sith are back and they're running around causing war, but we'll stop them eventually because we're the Jedi and we've been around forever and we always win in the end. There's just no way they could ever get the best of us. It's that kind of arrogance that blinded them to the dark side and the rise of Palpatine, as first kind of pointed out by Yoda in Attack of the Clones and then reiterated by Palpatine himself to Yoda.
A flaw more and more common among Jedi. Too sure of themselves they are, even the older, more experienced ones.
Your arrogance blinds you, Master Yoda.
So yeah, I don't think it's so much that they didn't believe in or weren't following the core tenets, that they were kind of becoming evil or anti-moralistic, if that's even a word. But they simply went about being Jedi the wrong way, and they had become so full of themselves that, like you said, it's basically becoming willful ignorance at that point, and it did directly lead to their demise. Alright, let's move on to this one from the Green Thunder, who said, I think there should be a distinction. Jedi themselves are paragons of virtue. People, on the other hand, are well-intended but make mistakes. George designed the Jedi to be models of virtue, but every person has to grapple with their own flaws and overcome them. A true Jedi following the way is a paragon of virtue. And I agree, the idea of a Jedi, of being completely selfless and only living for others and doing for others, that sounds as virtuous as you can get, pretty much. But like any idea, or system, or set of rules, or whatever it might be, it's only as good as those enacting or enforcing the rules. It'll almost always come down to the one who has the actual power and how responsible they are with that power. For example, you can invent the perfect form of government, but if the ones in power are corrupt or incompetent, it likely won't matter just how perfect that government is, or how perfect the system is. They'll find ways to circumvent it or use it to their advantage because they have the power, they have the control. Like I was just saying about Qui-Gon Jinn, and I often call him a true Jedi, or the best example we see of one in the prequels, and that's because for him it's only about those core tenets and following the will of the Force, not just going by what the book says or what the Jedi Code says, or even what he personally thinks is right. He is first and foremost kind of deferring to this higher power that, as far as we know anyway, is indeed infallible and always wants what's best for the galaxy on the whole. I think the Force is just kind of inherently seeking to be in a state of balance, and what the will of the Force actually is the Force essentially telling the Jedi how to keep or bring that about, how to keep things in balance or how to bring back the balance. Problem is, and I think this is again kind of where the Jedi of the prequel era go wrong, it's likely that not every single situation a Jedi encounters is going to be decided or kind of dictated by just listening to the will of the Force. It might not always, shall we say, kind of weigh in on every single situation, and they may have to defer to something else, to those rules they have in place, or to the will of the Senate. And so you do understand that even if they are supposed to, and usually or generally try to when they're doing the right thing, they try to listen to the will of the Force first and foremost, you still get why they have to have rules in place. I'm not trying to say, or wasn't before, that the Jedi Code is the problem as much as, again, ignoring a clear sign from the Force is the problem. And so yeah, in theory, I do think the Jedi way is, or can lead to being, a true paragon of virtue, especially considering it has this sort of luxury of being able to listen to an infallible higher power, which isn't to say I think the Force is sentient. Again, I think it inherently desires to be balanced, and the Jedi can kind of tap into that in a way. And so the Jedi can, in most circumstances, or with the most important ones anyway, they know or can kind of do what is right if they listen to the will of the Force. But the problem occurs when they don't listen to that will, and instead think they know what is best, or let the Senate decide. That then brings us to this comment from ADC 1222, who said, I think one of the main problems with the Jedi is how firmly they believe they are in the right. I can't remember the exact quote or who said it, but someone once said that a tyrant who believes they are helping you is far worse than a tyrant who is actively trying to harm you, since the one trying to harm you is more likely to eventually get bored and tired of the cruelty, but the one who thinks they are helping will have so much more motivation to continue. And I do get what you're saying here, but even at their worst, are the Jedi really tyrants? Are they out there in force, no pun intended, trying to impose their will upon the masses? I mean, maybe to some degree when they inject themselves in disputes or conflicts and demand them to be resolved in a way, or when they get involved in the Clone Wars to only fight for the Republic. That's probably the worst thing the Jedi ever do that we see. But I think of a tyrant as someone who wants to kind of control every aspect of your life and will use cruelty to achieve that, which is not something the Jedi of the prequel era are out there doing, even during the Clone Wars, I'd argue. In fact, I saw many comments that said the opposite in a way, that the problem with the Jedi is that they weren't out there among the people doing more for them, that they had sort of become aloof or above the cares of the common person of the galaxy. And don't get me wrong, I do think it's more than possible, if not fairly easy even, to become so virtuous in your own mind that you see retribution as a just weapon to be freely used against damn near any form of dissent or disagreement. I think there are some in the real world today who so unequivocally believe in what they believe that they see anyone who doesn't fully agree with them as evil, which is quite scary, but actually feels like it's become quite common today. But the Jedi don't actually preach any beliefs to be followed by others. It's not like they are out there saying everyone needs to heed the will of the Force or else we will make you heed the will of the Force. And again, the worst thing they did was get involved in the Clone Wars and try to, at the behest of the Republic, force the Separatists to kind of bend to the will of the Republic, which, no, wasn't a very good thing. And yeah, it may be a bit more tyrannical than I will or want to admit, but I don't think their intent is ever to make people live a certain way, per se. Alright, and let's move on to this one from Sir1322, who said, "It really depends on the time frame, and even during the prequels, it depends on each Jedi. Some of the most important attributes a Jedi must have, in my opinion, is that they need to be compassionate, they should not neglect their own emotions, and most importantly, they need to be able to let go. I think most prequel Jedi lack at least one of these attributes. Windu definitely did not show compassion, Anakin couldn't let go." And part of the reason I worded the poll question the way I did, why I put the "from your point of view" part in there, is because I was curious to see where people's minds would immediately kind of go to when they thought of or when they heard Jedi. And most comments, the huge or vast majority, they talked about the prequel Jedi in some way, shape, or form, which didn't surprise me. It does tend to make sense considering in the films, at least, that's the only time we really truly see the Jedi Order and learn a great deal about what they stood for and how they operate. Though it is, again, kind of tainted by them being on the cusp of a great failure, if you will. But anyway, you're right, that perhaps the most important part of being a Jedi, and the hardest, is that you have to be compassionate without being attached. You have to have your own emotions. It's not like Jedi deny themselves emotions, they just try to control them. But you have to have emotions, you have to care about people without caring too much for an individual person, so much so that you start doing more for them than you do for the greater good. Just look at what Anakin did. You have to somehow love others without ever being in love. And I do understand why some think that is almost inhumane or cruel in a way. Which brings us to this comment from Turt Templeton, who said, "One of the big problems I have with Disney Star Wars is Luke's 'the Jedi have a legacy of failure' idea. The Jedi were able to maintain peace for over 1,000 years. They eventually became too close to the Republic and thus failed, but the tenets of their order were not the problem. Their entanglement with the Senate was. A lot of people claim their forced non-attachment is inhumane and evil, and that's somewhat true, but it is the cost of the great power they hold. It seems inhumane to us as we do not live with the same stakes that they do. The ontological rules of our galaxy are different. They must be stoic and detached to make the truly just decisions regardless of their personal feelings. They're too powerful to have the luxury of personal whims." And yes, you do have to keep in mind that in the Star Wars galaxy, the Force and the dark side are real, and thus the Jedi are needed to safeguard the galaxy against them. And though, like I was just saying, I get why some people think that's inhumane or cruel, it's really not when you stop and think about the sense of purpose that comes with what they do. Basically, the idea here, and this comes from George Lucas himself, though not worded exactly like I'm about to, but the idea here is that as a Jedi, when you possess nothing, you have everything to gain, and joy comes from all that you do and give to others instead of what you take for yourself. While for the Sith, when you possess or try to possess everything, you only end up with everything to lose, and fear comes from anyone and everyone trying to take everything away from you. Living like a Jedi is not inhumane or even necessarily hard when you truly embrace it. It offers you a sense of joy and meaning that cannot be achieved virtually any other way. And in that galaxy where the dark side is again very much a real thing, a Jedi would not want you to feel bad or sad for them. They'd want you to live your best life free of the evil that the dark side could bring, if not for them. As for Luke's "the legacy of the Jedi is failure," well, that might just be the dumbest words ever uttered in Star Wars. Though sure, you can argue that's just how Luke felt in the moment and is trying to dissuade Rey from becoming a Jedi. However, and I've used this analogy before, but I think it's the perfect one, but Luke saying that after the Jedi had existed for 1,000 generations and kept the peace and justice for all that time, would be like someone who has a car that goes something like 500, 600, 700,000 miles, something pretty crazy, without it ever having any major flaws or problems along the way other than, oil changes, tires, and maybe a little problem here and there, sure. But then when it finally breaks down once and for all and for good, you would then declare the car was always nothing more than junk, and that you would never ever consider buying that make and model again. That's my comparison to Luke saying the legacy of the Jedi is failure. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. Though, like I said, there were a lot of great comments left on this poll, so I may do another video either on this channel or maybe my other channel that kind of goes into some of them. But either way, for now, do take to the comments below and tell me what you think about the Jedi Order. Are they evil? Are they true paragons of virtue? Or are they somewhere in between the two? Whatever you think, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.